The most appropriate requirement of the Central Limit Theorem is that it A. requires a finite population variance, B. requires the population to be normally distributed, or C. asserts that for small sample sizes, the distribution of sample mean will be approximately normal. So looking at C right off the bat, this would have to say large in order for this to be correct. So it asserts that for large sample sizes, the distribution of sample mean will be approximately normal, meaning that if we take enough samples from a population, then the distribution of those observations should end up looking like a approximately normal distribution. So we can rule out C. B requires the population to be normally distributed. It does not require the population to be normally distributed. It can be any shape of distribution, but in the theorem, it should be the sample that we take, if it's large enough, should or will end up being normally distributed. So A is going to be our answer. Requires a finite population variance, and this is going to be required so that the population is not too skewed one way or the other. If this was infinite, then it would be unlikely that you would end up having a normal distribution from your sample. So we'll go with answer A. A large positive value of the Spearman rank correlation, such as 0.9, would most likely indicate that. So 0.9 correlation, this is high, so we're looking for something with high correlation. A high rank in 1 year is associated with a low rank in the second year. That doesn't sound right. If a high rank in 1 year, if we have high correlation, that means that we would expect a high rank in the second year. So we can rule out A. B, a high rank in 1 year is associated with a high rank in the second year. That sounds good and would be the opposite of what we were looking for or what we saw in A. And then answer C, a high rank in 1 year will not have any impact on the rank in the second year. That's also going to be incorrect. This is a high correlation, close to 1, meaning that the two variables that we're looking at, in this case, a high rank in 1 year and a high rank in the second year, they should be highly correlated. So if we should expect the same thing. So high and high, or it could have been low and low, or something like that. Answer B. A renowned economist has calculated that the Canadian economy will be in one of 3 possible states in the coming year: boom, normal, or slow. The following table gives the returns of stocks A and B under each economic state. So we have the probability of the states, and then the returns of stocks A and the return of stock B. Compute the covariance of the returns for stocks A and B. And we've got 3 numbers here. So this is going to be a very long calculation-intensive question. I would not expect that you get something this long on the exam, but nonetheless, this will be a good problem or exercise to work through to understand all parts of the question you could get. So this covariance formula up here, this is going to be essentially our end game. This is what we're going to be using to calculate this. So what this is going to be the summation of all of this. So what we're going to have to do is take each of these 3 different scenarios. So boom, normal, slow, and we'll plug in that probability. And then we're going to have to multiply that by the return during that probability. So the return during boom, or the probability during boom, will be 40, and then the return is 12. And then we have to subtract that, though, from the expected return. So we're going to calculate expected return of A and expected return of B first, and then we're going to need to compare it essentially to each of these 3 different probabilities and scenarios. So expected return of A and then expected return of B are right here. So this is just going to be a weighted average of these 3 different possibilities. So for A, we've got 0.4 times 0.12, so 40% times 12%, and then 35% times 10% can be seen here, and then one more, 25% times 8%. That gives us a expected return of A under any scenario, essentially, of 10.3%. And then we're going to do the same thing for B here. I won't walk through all of those line by line, but we end up getting 15.45%. So now we have to calculate the covariance under each of these 3 different scenarios, and then we're going to add them together right down here. So under the boom scenario, our covariance is going to be 0.4, which is given here. And then we're going to multiply that by our expected return for stock A of 12%, the return of stock A of 12%, subtract out the expected return, and then we're going to multiply that by the return of stock B, subtract out the expected return of stock B. So that gives us a covariance in this scenario of 0.0001734. And without going line by line on all these, you're going to apply those same things to the normal state and the slow state. So you end up with these three individual covariance numbers, add them all together, and that's going to give you the overall covariance for the returns of these two different stocks, and it is 0.000376525. So when we round that up, we will get answer B. Zhang is developing a regression model to predict stock market returns using the GDP growth rate. He considers quarterly returns of the S&P 500 as a proxy for stock market returns and quarterly changes in GDP as GDP growth rate. The linear regression model is as follows. Zhang develops the following regression statistics based on the last 10 years of quarterly data pertaining to the S&P 500 and GDP. So we have our stats here, coefficient, intercept, and slope, and standard errors of each of those. The most appropriate interpretation of the slope coefficient is answer A, 3.8426% change in GDP growth rate per 1% change in S&P 500. B, 3.8426 units of change in GDP growth rate per unit in change in S&P 500 return. So between these two, units of change versus percent change, we're going to be going with units. This isn't necessarily scaled to percentages. Our regression output is going to be based on units. And then for C, we have 3.8426 units of change in S&P 500 return per unit change in GDP growth rate. Answer C is going to be our answer because S&P is our dependent variable, and it's going to be dependent on GDP growth rate. So what this means is our coefficient, this is going to be that beta 1. So if this is 1, we're going to be multiplying it by this number or multiplying that by 2. So when this goes up by 1, S&P is going to be 1 times this greater plus the intercept. Our intercept is going to go right here for that beta 0 number. Answer C. Two stocks, X and Y, correlate 0.5. Stock Y's return has a standard deviation of 0.26. Given that the covariance between X and Y is 0.005, the variance of returns for stock X is closest to. So we're going to be using our correlation formula to solve this. One tricky thing here is we're looking for variance of returns for stock X, but we're given standard deviation of stock Y, and that's also what's in our formula here. So we're going to have to transform this in the end, we'll see. So we've got correlation is equal to the covariance of stocks X and Y, and then we're dividing by standard deviation of X and standard deviation of Y. We're given standard deviation of Y, correlation, and the covariance. We need to solve for standard deviation of X and then transform that to variance. So this is going to be our algebra portion here. I won't walk through all of this. But in the end here, we get standard deviation of X of 0.0385. We're going to square that to transform that into variance, which is 0.0015, which is going to be closest to answer A here. We just rounded up a little earlier. But you'd see if you didn't square that, you would have went with answer B. But got to make sure we do that last step. Answer A. Which of the following policy combinations is most likely to lead to reduction in aggregate demand from both the public and private sectors? So remember, public sector is going to be primarily driven by fiscal policy, and private sector is going to be driven by monetary policy, which is the Fed and changing of interest rates. Fiscal policy is going to be government and basically spending packages. So reduction in demand, is that going to be tight fiscal? Yes, that will be tight fiscal, but easy monetary, that's going to be incorrect. For reduction, we're looking for tight fiscal, tight monetary. So we've got easy fiscal, so that'll be incorrect, and tight monetary, that'll be good. And C, we have tight and tight, Tight meaning they're not spending as much from the government side, and tight on the monetary side means they're keeping interest rates higher or doing something else to kind of keep the money supply a little bit lower, which is leading to that reduced demand. Answer C. If the marginal propensity to consume is 60% and the tax rate is 70%, the fiscal multiplier is most likely. This is a pretty straightforward formula, so we'll pull this in and work through it. We're going to take 1 and then we're going to divide that by 1 minus our MPC, so 1 minus 60%. And then we're multiplying that by 1 minus the tax rate. So 1 minus 30% gives us 0.7. And this is essentially telling us if we give money to consumers, how much of this are they going to spend? And then that multiplier essentially tells you, okay, if we give consumers $1, that's going to lead to an additional $1.72 worth of spending. Answer A. In Barbados, foreigners are not generally permitted to own land. Although there are many exceptions made, the more obvious being the presence of major hotels from the USA and other countries dotting the beachfront, these restrictions are classified as A. Import quotas. This is not an import quota. An import quota would be something like Barbados does not allow soybeans or coffee or something like that to be imported into Barbados, or they only allow a certain amount per year. This is saying we can't own land. It's not related to something being imported. B, capital restrictions. This is a type of capital restriction, and sometimes it applies to other stuff like foreigners can't own stocks or they can't own bonds or something like that. In this case, it's land. So their capital is restricted because it can't come in and buy up the local land in this case, with some exceptions, obviously. And then C, domestic content provisions. So this is going to be kind of similar to import quotas, where this is going to be related to some good or service that's produced, and basically says that a certain amount of that good needs to be produced in the domestic country, so in this case Barbados, and only a certain amount can come from outside. So again, similar to import quotas, not related to investment in capital ownership. Answer B. Which of the following is most likely a sell-side participant in the Forex market? Is it A, large banks, B, individual retail accounts, or C, privately held companies? So a sell-side participant is going to be somebody that is an intermediary and provides a role where they're matching up. They might be a market maker and they're matching up buyers and sellers on each side, and kind of facilitating liquidity, facilitating trades, stuff like that. So between these three, privately held companies and individual retail accounts, they might be trading in the foreign exchange markets. Privately held companies might be doing this to hedge. Individual retail accounts might be doing this to speculate. But the banks, they're going to be the middlemen or women in these markets and facilitating that liquidity between these different types of accounts. So the individual retail may want to go long some commodity or currency, and the privately held company might want to go short. The bank is going to be the intermediary between those two, providing that liquidity, making sure that the trades are happening. Answer A. A fiscal policy may not be able to stabilize aggregate demand completely, most likely because. So we've got these three statements here, and then we need to decide which are correct. So 1 and 1, 1 and 3, or 1, 2, and 3. So for statement 1, relevant data often appears well after a policy decision needs to be made. That is certainly a correct answer. It takes time to gather data, and for that data to come in, we don't have it in real time, especially when you're looking at huge things like the United States GDP or other data points that take massive amounts of data to calculate themselves. It's not going to be ready right on the nose when policy decisions need to be made. And even then, that data oftentimes gets revised months or even years later, and so there's definitely a lag there. 2, there is uncertainty about where the economy will be heading independent of policy changes. That's also going to be a correct statement. We have a very intricate and large economy worldwide, and regardless of whether we have all the information or know everything, we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. And then 3, private sector behavior may change as discretionary fiscal adjustments are announced. this is also going to be an accurate statement. Think of something like taxes. If taxes get lowered, that could lead to increased investment for the private sector. Or looking at the United States, last year passing the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there's some provisions in there for businesses where they can expense a lot more of their R&D or certain business expenses up front. So by doing that and making these fiscal adjustments, that's leading to changes in private sector behaviors to take advantage of those tax cuts and credits and adjustments. So we've got all three of these are good. Answer C.